Nat, let's go to you. Welcome us to NHTSA, please.
Yeah, and thanks, Alan, for inviting me back. It's funny because I was thinking what a difference a year makes, right? I think the federal government is often accused of being slow, and somebody was making a joke earlier, Paul, I think it was, about how long it takes to do regulations, this, that, and the other thing. And sitting here recounting all the things that have happened under the past year under Secretary Child's leadership is actually pretty remarkable. Last year we were talking about 1.0 and these 4 chapters, and if anybody actually went and read it, they would have saw that it was well over 100 pages and had all sorts of interesting things in there. Everything from future regulatory structure to guidance to states to guidance to manufacturers and thought pieces. And in September we released something called 2.0, which was essentially just over 30 pages or so that really focused on the best of the best and left everything else behind. And what's in that document is really the core essence of what it means to be testing and deploying, sorry everybody, level 3 vehicles and above on the nation's roadways. You know, I think for us, that core piece was built over several years, and after lots of discussion with just about anybody who would talk with us, including other governments, Transportation Research Board, et cetera. And it's interesting how, you know, Bernard and I were joking about this cry from industry all the time to standardize things, or when is the government going to standardize things? And you know, to some extent, we're waiting for the industry to do some of this on its own, right? It shouldn't always be up to the government to standardize what the HMI is or why FCW systems behave differently, right? I think the professor down here will go through great lengths to talk about what it means to actually write regulations that make sense and that are necessary. He's written kind of whole books about it. And so I think where we sit today in the AV space is a shocker that there are no federal impediments to anyone deploying a level 3 and above vehicle on U.S. roads. Zero. There's no FMVSS in the way. There's some state authority questions that in some states need to be grappled with, but there is no FMVSS in the way. So what we've done is sort of allow that to continue. And the way we've allowed that to continue is under this guidance document that we put out in September. And so what that document calls is for industry to step out onto the plate and make a description of how they're treating safety to the American public in something called a voluntary self-assessment. We didn't tell them how to do it, although picking up on the experience that Bernard has, maybe we should have, but we're not. We're not providing details about how to answer these. Companies should do it for themselves. And so there's actually 2 companies that have taken a step to do it. One's Waymo and one's GM. And you know, if you believe the critics, some say they're marketing pieces and they're this, that, and the other thing. And that's a start, right? And I think where we are right now is really focused on implementing that 2.0 vision that the Secretary laid out, which is really working together with the states to make sure that the federal government does what it needs to do, both in terms of a defect recall authority if the need arises, but in terms of providing our expectation on safety to anybody that's out there testing and deploying vehicles. So that was sort of one big thing, but we've actually done 2 more things in the process over the past year. The other thing that has happened is a whole lot of companies, mostly driven from designers wanting to do really cool shit with the vehicle, asking us to take pedals out and remove steering wheels and all this stuff, that's sort of the fantasy that the public, I think, is expecting these vehicles to deliver. You know, they want to be able to get in the back seat and, I don't know, we were joking about drives down to DC from here, you know, maybe, you know, take a lift or something and watch Breaking Bad the whole way down. Well, you could take a taxi if that's really what you wanted to do, I think, is Alan's point sometime. But if that be the case, our job is to make sure that we're not holding innovation back. So in September, we actually awarded a contract of the tune of just over $6 million to Virginia Tech. And the premise of that contract is to go through all 60 plus, 70 plus federal motor vehicle safety standards and find out where does the term steering wheel show up, brake pedal show up, or driver control, or some reference to the driver, et cetera. And what we're really doing is trying to figure out, from a self-certification standpoint, which is the regime in the United States, how does a company self-certify to that standard if the equipment isn't there? It's not so much that the standards require those, It's actually the fact that in order to run the compliance test, you have to use those controls. And so we're going through with Virginia Tech to say, okay, if there's no steering wheel and we have this really elaborate test to determine whether a vehicle has stability control, how do you run that test? Because no one's saying get rid of stability control. What everyone's saying is we just don't know how to run the test, or we have ideas on how to run the test, but there's no steering wheel there. So that's a huge emphasis of work right now going on in my office. But not to leave safety behind, because people have the perception that we're just running around deregulating everything, and I'm sure you'll talk about that in a little bit, because that's absolutely not the case. It's maintaining safety. The Secretary keeps reiterating that, but people like to use talking points and say that we're removing safety. There is absolutely no removal of safety going on. We're really just trying to figure out how to run compliance tests in an area where vehicles might not have controls. In parallel, my office is also looking at sort of the same hard questions that some folks were asking Danny earlier. How do you test these vehicles? How do you validate simulation? You know, we took a big step at NHTSA in saying it's going to probably be a whole bunch of things about proving the vehicle is safe. It'll be on road, it'll be test track like we've always done, but simulation will likely be a key piece of that. But I've been in this business a long time, and I can tell you I've been on the side of the table where manufacturers come in with all their simulation results saying we got this answer, and I'm saying, yeah, but this is what happened when we actually did the physical test. And there's all sorts of reasons why those differences happen, but in essence, sometimes the physical test doesn't agree with the simulation. So how do you resolve that? How do you actually come up with enough scenarios? This term edge cases is starting to take a life of its own. I would just call them scenarios that actually capture the safety of the vehicle, right? Is it umpteenth number of pedestrian cases? Is it the Navia case in Vegas where you have to do a scenario where a dump truck is backing up in an alley into a vehicle? I mean, all these things are things that the designers are thinking about, and the question for us as regulators is there a minimal set? And again, you'll hear a theme. This is not like us doing it on our own. We're actually working with industry to do this. So we've actually charged industry with working with us to come up with these scenarios. Is there a minimum set? Is it 30? Is it 50? Is it 5,000? No one knows the answer to that yet. And really the question is, how do you do that and also be technology neutral and allow the innovation to flourish? You know, there was a question raised earlier about weather conditions, right? It's kind of crappy weather today here compared to last year, which was awesome. You know, we have rain and rain and rain. You know, if your vehicle can't operate in the rain, as a government and as innovators, as long as the vehicle is not operating in the rain, we should be okay with that. We shouldn't be demanding all these things be placed on the vehicle before it's allowed to operate, right? It should be ODD specific, right, based on how it's been designed, and if it gets into a situation that it's not, it takes the appropriate action. Usually means to fail safe, stop, or whatever it needs to do. And so coming up with that flexible framework is something that we're spending a lot of time at NHTSA on thinking about those scenarios, because we don't want to be in a situation where we're pushing minimum sets of scenarios that set the bar so high that it's never achievable. And then I'll leave with this because I have to tease Alan about this. So one thing I actually would like this group to think about really hard, because it keeps coming up. So everybody likes to compare the autopilot, and then we'll quickly say FCW doesn't work or AEB doesn't work. I think there's an argument to be made that AEB is a safety feature. It is a safety feature. By definition, it activates when the driver didn't do anything. It's not to say that people should be putting other types of systems on there and then relying on safety features to kind of pick up the slack. It's sort of the equivalent of saying, I'm going to have a really crappy vehicle design and rely on the airbag to save the occupant, right? That's not how we design and engineer vehicles today. So yes, does AEB work in all the scenarios? Absolutely not. It's not designed to. And that's something that I think we have to figure out how to communicate to the public, because what's happening is the public is starting to think that none of this stuff works. And it's one of the reasons why I think without that voluntary agreement that Matt mentioned earlier, we'd actually find ourselves in a situation not being able to convince the public that they actually need some of these safety features, which is different than something like ACC. So just keep that in mind.
Great, thank you, Nat. And I'd like to later on come back to the flexible regulatory framework that you mentioned, including the self-assessments. So it is a wonderful day to be inside, I think we can agree.
Yes.
The headline that I took from your introduction was that there are no Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, FMVSS, in the way. And that's a bold pronouncement. I'd like to get into the lead of that article, because you then talked about ways in which companies might encounter difficulty self-certifying that their vehicles do in fact comply with the particular standards given their test procedures. And this was an issue that several years ago under the past administration, the chief counsel opined on from NHTSA. So when you say that there are no FMVSS in the way, is that with respect to the automated operation of a vehicle that has a brake pedal and steering wheels?
Correct.
Or are you going further and saying that a driverless shuttle without?
No, that's a great clarification. It's really with respect to conventional vehicle design today. And maybe to add a little bit more flavor to that, you know, it's not like everybody in the industry is jumping straight towards let's remove all the pedals and stuff, right? There is some that are, you would call a progression path. Others are kind of wanting to jump levels, et cetera. So when I say that there are no federal impediments, really like you could take a vehicle out there, put some self-driving software on it, and you're done. If you're trying to remove pedals, or you're trying to come up with an alternative design like some of the shuttles that are out there where there's different configurations, they don't quite fit into a nice category, then yeah, there are issues, and that's some of the things that my office is working on, absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you.